Senator Greig.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, no speech from Senator Cherry is ever complete without facts and figures and statistics. I was sitting here in morbid fear of yet another chart being distributed, or perhaps even an overhead projector being produced so he could talk us through the matrix of it. Senator Cherry spoke to begin with of preferences and the fickle flow of preferences. We, minor parties, often live and die by preferences. So it's first and foremost in my farewell speech that I want to give my most sincere thanks to the Reverend Fred Nile, who in 1998 embarked on a preference blunder which sent me into this place. Thank you, Fred. I suspect you've had many sleepless nights over 6 years, but you can estimate. I thank, first and foremost, apart from Fred, the members of the party. They are, for the most part, volunteers. They do an extraordinary amount of work. Every Polly in this place knows that volunteers are essential. I think what is sometimes not understood properly is how limited the resources are in smaller parties. We rely so heavily on those people who fold newsletters, stuff envelopes, walk the streets and knock doors, hand out how to vote cards, make coffee, and who serve on all the administrative wings of the party. To those people I express my sincere thanks. I'd like to acknowledge also the presence in the visitors gallery today of former MLC from Western Australia, Helen Hodgson, who now lives and works in Sydney. Thank you, Helen, for honouring us with your visit today. And I want to place on record my appreciation of Helen's early work in the West Australian Parliament on lesbian and gay law reform, but there'll be more of that later, but you won't be surprised to hear that. I thank too the people of Western Australia who entrusted me over the last 6 years to serve them through the prism of Democrats' policy and philosophy, and I trust that I have done that to the best of my capacity. It has been an honour and a privilege to serve in this place, and something that I never took for granted. Having been a staffer, I know what it is to work for politicians, to be underappreciated by them, to have your work taken as theirs. I have long believed that politicians are only as good as their staff. To that end, if I've been able to inspire people, advocate for change or achieve outcomes, it has been because of my staff. I'd like to most especially acknowledge Di Graham, who has been the backbone of my office for 6 years and who is an extraordinary public relations and media officer. I could not have done what I did without her. Thank you, Di, for sticking with me. I know she has respect right across the Democrats Party. Yeah. I wish her well in her next career, whatever that might be, and spending more time with her dogs and horses and enjoying her property in the southwest of Western Australia. To Jason Rostant, who is in Perth, not here today, but who has done extraordinary work in the area of social services and people with disabilities, who has achieved and attracted amazing respect and confidence from that constituency. I'm greatly indebted to him for that, and also his terrific work within the lesbian and gay community. To Di Green, my admin officer in Perth, it's very often the case that I don't know where I am, why I'm there, or what I'm supposed to be doing. I phoned Di Green in Perth and she tells me. To John Derry, who was originally on my Perth staff, but I lost him to Senator Ellison and to Melbourne. John, thank you for being there in the early days. I wish you very well for your future career. You're a very talented person, most particularly in the area of public relations. In terms of my portfolio responsibilities, the two key areas I have worked on have been the Attorney General's portfolio and the Family and Community Services portfolio. The AG's portfolio is the busiest in terms of legislative load, and it's sometimes a little overwhelming, most particularly in recent years with so much ASIO and anti-terror stuff coming through. I note Senator Mason nodding in agreement. He would be well aware of that given his role on the Legal and Constitutional Legislation and References Committees. So within that regard, I offer my sincere thanks and appreciation to Joe Pride, a very talented legal eagle, and Karen Nangle, whose work in family and community services have been extraordinary. I offer my sincere thanks also to Senate staff, the attendants, clerks, Black Rod, to Anne. It's an honour to be retiring with you. To Cleaver Elliott. Cleaver, I think you probably know more about spam, open source software, malware, and other forms of IT than is probably healthy for any one person. I suspect you're now the brightest person in the building on those topics, and it was all because of me. I'm sorry to have shoved those private members' bills in your direction, but I'm confident the country is better for it. My thanks also to Chris Pelzer and his team at DOFA in Perth. They are exceptional. And to the library staff, and Jennifer Norbury in particular. Chair, when I first came into this place, looking back over my first speech, I spoke almost entirely of my experiences growing up as a young person who knew themselves to be gay and dealing with the difficulties of that and struggling to achieve law reform in terms of decriminalisation, partnership rights, anti-discrimination laws and so on. It never dawned on me at the time, but that speech still haunts me, not in a negative way, in a really positive way. Rarely a week goes by when I don't get a letter or an email from someone anywhere around the world acknowledging that speech and thanking me for making it. I didn't quite realise it at the time, but what I was saying, whilst it was very, very familiar to me, was new to many people in here. I never quite meant it to be the only message I brought here, and it wasn't, but it's the one which has resonated the most. It was the case that just a few days after I gave my first speech, I received an email from a 14-year-old boy called Sam, who had heard me doing some radio grabs on Triple J the following day, who thanked me for that, who explained that he had only just recently come out to his mother and was dealing with the issues of being young and gay. To his great credit, Sam is now studying law at university. It turns out he lives in Perth. I didn't know that at the time. He joined the Australian Democrats under his own volition. I didn't twist his arm. And he now serves as the president of the Murdoch University Law Society. It's those kinds of things, those kinds of outcomes, which mean far more to me than legislative wins in this place. When I came here, I spoke of how appalling the situation in Western Australia was in terms of anti-homosexual laws. The laws at that time were the worst in the whole of Western and Eastern Europe, with the exception of Romania. Gay men were still being arrested, charged and imprisoned under laws that did not apply to anybody else. Thankfully, those laws have been abolished. They no longer exist. It was a great joy for me to see them finally removed, and I pay tribute to the Gay and Lesbian Equality Group in Western Australia, the Gallop Labor government and other parliamentarians who helped bring that about. Western Australia went from having some of the worst laws in the world to some of the best. But nothing has happened federally, and so it has been a strong message from me over recent years, as I'm sure you're aware, that the Commonwealth needs to complement what has happened at a state and federal level. We need national anti-discrimination laws, and more especially partnership laws for same-sex couples. National debate on those sorts of issues have been stymied and suffocated. The Spindler Bill has been on the notice paper for 10 or 11 years without support in this chamber. The only area we've come anywhere close to having a sort of national dialogue on these issues was with the marriage ban of last year, legislation I found personally very difficult to deal with. But that too was guillotined. There was no quality debate on that, and the inquiry, which I had hoped to get up and had support for, was subsequently withdrawn. Chair, we need a national dialogue, a proper, mature, sensible debate on these issues. The current situation whereby there is no partnership recognition hurts people. It hurts communities and it disrupts public policy. We've seen, for example, just in recent weeks, 3 highly skilled medical professionals unable to migrate to Australia to take up skills shortages because they can't bring their partners here because their partners aren't regarded as family. Just the other day I received an email from a young guy in the Defence Forces. He's openly gay, he's based in Sydney. He and his partner have just been asked to move or relocated to Perth, which they will do because they serve their country. The department will not provide travel allowance or accommodation provisions for his partner. They will provide travel allowance and kennel provisions for his dog. I think the fault line really cracked when at 3 a.m. one morning some years ago we were discussing superannuation yet again. I think that debate, as emotive and full on as it was very important, and it marked a shift in attitude in this place. And if there's one thing I've tried to achieve in here is that by being myself, telling my story and that of others, people might listen, they might respect, they may disagree, but hopefully they may change. That hasn't fully happened here. There has been some attitudinal change, and Senator Hill was kind enough to acknowledge that in his contribution a few days ago. But if what I've done is open the door for others to follow, then I'm very proud of that legacy. Although I confess that at many times I have felt like the character Daffit in Little Britain as being the only gay in the Senate. Each of the desks in this place has a number. I don't know whether senators have noticed them. Mine is, ironically, 54B. West Australian senators might recognise that as being a part of the criminal code. For some years ago in Western Australia, when under the then court government, 54B was an astonishing piece of legislation which said that any 3 people who gathered in public without a permit could be arrested and charged. It was a way of cracking down on public protest. There were mass demonstrations against 54B, and the overall message was, if you have something to say, you should say it. I've done that. Other senators have said in this place in recent days, in talking to other senators, referring to other senators who are retiring, particularly senators of faith, those seen to champion moral issues, have described them as values politicians. The danger in that notion is that it suggests that other senators, those who hold different views, are not values politicians. This is wrong. I believe that hounding war criminals to the grave is a great value. I believe that protecting women from sex trafficking is a great value. I believe that treating asylum seekers with dignity and compassion is a great value. I believe that protecting gay and lesbian people from discrimination and legally recognising their relationships is a great value. These two are strong moral issues, and I too stand here today as a values politician. And my party is a party of values. I joined the party under Cheryl Curnow, served under Meg Lees and Senator Stott Despoja, and more recently Senator Bartlett. And there's no point in raking over old coals, most especially when Matt Price is listening to the broadcast. But I do want to acknowledge the early role of Senator Lees in my party and to thank her for the role she played in helping elect me in 1998. My sincere best wishes go to my colleagues John Cherry and Aidan Ridgway. My party has been, in recent years, diminished from 7 to 4. I consider that a symphony to a quartet. I'm still encouraging my colleagues to make good use of that time to continue to make good music. I think, ironically, the dynamic of the Senate over the next 3 years is actually a great opportunity for them, an opportunity to appeal directly to the voters about the Senate, its place in our body politic, and the inherent danger in any government having absolute power. I wish the quartet very well and will follow their deliberations closely. I do regret the destructive divisions of 3 years ago. I took what action I thought was required to cauterise the wounds, and indeed at one point asked the party to let me lead it, and served in that capacity for 6 weeks. However, it wasn't to be, but that's politics and life moves on. I think one of the most important lessons I've learnt since I've been here is that the most precious resource is time, and that the most important thing in the world is friends and family. To Dad and Cheryl in Perth, thank you for being there. To Mum, who now lives in Queensland, up in Yamundi, all the best. To my sisters, Renelle and Melinda, thank you. I offer my special best wishes to Renelle, who a year ago joined the Air Force and who serves in Darwin. To John and Eric in Canberra, I said in my early days that they shared this journey with me. I apologise for the bumpiness of the journey and the fact that we had to get off the bus several times to vomit, but we got there in the end. And to my friend Ray in Perth, who kept me sane with his late night phone calls to see if I was okay. There is a great tyranny of distance in living in Perth and working in Canberra. It's difficult, and it makes for a lonely job. I won't miss the long plane trips or being away from home or sitting in motel rooms devouring the entire contents of the minibar out of boredom and frustration. That is the reality of the life of senators, not the glamour of chauffeured cars and cocktail hours as it's sometimes portrayed as being. Separation and divorce takes its high toll in this place. My partner Keith, who hasn't seen me really for 6 years, I thank him sincerely for keeping me anchored, for mowing the lawn, for walking the dog, and for being my husband. I don't care what anybody says. You cannot legislate against love. Having spent almost 20 years together as a couple, it was very difficult for me to sit in this place a year ago and be told that my relationship was not real, did not have the same level of love, commitment, trust and affection as a heterosexual relationship, and that we must be relegated to second class at the back of the bus. I believe that in 10, perhaps 20 years, that law will change. I see strong attitudinal change in the community, most particularly with those people under the age of 35. It will be the case that that bill will be revisited, and students and historians will look back on that bill with shame. I'd like to end with one brief story, if I can. And it was a very recent one, and I hope the President and Senator Knowles will forgive me for telling it. But at the dinner the other night, the celebratory dinner for the 15 leaving senators, I took the opportunity to attach a pen to my menu. I like to collect signatures and autographs. I like political memorabilia. I was moving my pen around the table of the 15 senators who were there, and it was taking some time to get around. And it got to Senator Knowles, who signed in it, and then who passed it to her right to the President at the table, who was in conversation with someone on the other side and who wasn't quite listening as to what was going on. And he said something like, "Oh, what's this?" And Sue Knowles said, "Oh, it's from Brian, sign it." And he went, "Oh, right, okay." So he took the pen and he started writing. And he was writing and writing and writing. And I thought, gosh, this is very flattering. And then suddenly Sue Knowles had a look of horror on her face. She leaned over and grabbed the arm of the President and discreetly, but not discreetly enough for me not to overhear it, said, "Not Brian Harradine, Brian Greig." Without skipping a beat, the President, quite deadpan, looked at me across the table and said, "Oh, gee, you don't mind if I cross a lot of this out, do you?" He did just that. I still have the menu, I still have the writing crossed out, and I would cherish it until such point as eBay becomes more attractive. I thank other senators for their kind contributions and send my best wishes to those who are retiring. It was said in 1999 that the election of Bin Chen, Aidan Ridgway and Brian Greig heralded a new era of tolerance, diversity and representation. I don't know what it says about this place that all three senators are now leaving. I pay tribute to Senator Harradine. There is little we would agree on, I think, but his survival in this place over 3 decades is remarkable in itself, and I wish him well in retirement. And I also offer particular best wishes to Senator Cook, who was my first political employer. I worked for him in 1990 in his elected office in Perth when he was then Minister for Industrial Relations. He has made an excellent contribution and earned the right to enjoy a healthy retirement. When I was on his staff, I came to Canberra for my first time ever, very briefly. It was just a few days that I was here, 6 days I think, and it was an extraordinary honour. I had never worked in political offices before, I had never been to Canberra or Parliament before. I soaked up that experience hugely, and when it came time to leave, I physically sat in the large square hall behind us. It was late at night, much like it is now. It was dark and it was quiet, there was no one there. The lights were low. It's a very beautiful, very meditative place to be at this time of night. And I sat in one of those benches there and soaked up the atmosphere, sincerely and fervently believing that it would be highly unlikely that I ever returned to Canberra, let alone to Parliament. And I just wanted to remember the moment. Amazing things and unexpected things can happen in people's lives. Before I leave here tonight, I will once again go and sit in that chair by the Black Fountain. Thank you and farewell.